So I'm going to talk about the Wasson Creek Watershed Restoration Project, and I'm going to focus more on the planning and implementation of the restoration and a little bit on the monitoring. So I'm the Stewardship Coordinator here at the South Slough Reserve. So we're part of the National Estuarine Research Reserve System, and that has NOAA as our federal partner. And then here in Oregon, we have Department of State Lands as our state partner. And then this project is also part of the Coos Basin Coho Partnership. And thanks, Melissa, for introducing the NERS system and the CDMO, which I'll reference here. I also wanted to point out that there's a large staff here at the Reserve that contribute to this project. So I'm focusing on the planning and implementation side of things, as Jenny Schmidt is our monitoring lead. And then in terms of people interested in GIS and UAS and LIDAR and that in this group, Jennifer Kirkland is the lead on that. And we have other staff working on the project as well. We also have a large partnership with advisors from several different agencies and tribes that are really have been working for a long time for this project. So this is a stage 0 restoration project. So I'm going to give a little bit of background and project development and then restoration implementation and then touch on monitoring. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with stage 0 restoration projects, this was the original channel evolution model published in 1984, where this guidance of this sort of stable, meandering stream state was used in restoration projects for designs and objectives. So here's an example of a restoration project that used this model to develop a sinuous, meandering channel at Anderson Creek, which is in the South Slough watershed. And then researchers started challenging this concept of a single thread sinuous channel in these depositional valleys. And so in 2013, Clue and Thorne developed this updated evolutionary model, and you can see that original model overlays here. So in this updated model, there's several other states in this evolution of a stream. And then there's also this precursor state where it's this anastomizing wetland system. So here's an example of that stage 0 state from South Slough Reserve. It's called Tom's Creek, and this is used as one of our reference sites in our monitoring program. And then you can see the difference between this sort of complex flow pathways in the top and this sort of single meandering channel below. So then this updated stream evolution model was also evaluated with a whole bunch of different attributes that I won't go into here, but they basically found that this stage 0 sort of had higher scores than that original stage 1 design, and both of which were much higher than those degraded systems like stage 2. So the case study that I'm going to talk about is the Wasson Creek Watershed Restoration Project. And so where we started in this project was this stage 2 incised channel, where this area had been ditched for agriculture along the side of the valley here, and reed canary grass was dominant vegetation type here. So where are we located? So South Slough Reserve is in the traditional lands, ancestral lands of the Millet Coos people. So we work closely with the confederated tribes of the Coos-Loa Umpqua and Siuslaw Indians and the Kukwel Indian tribe in planning this project, implementing the restoration and ongoing co-stewardship. So here's the Wasson Creek watershed here, and on the right-hand side, you can see a main valley area, which is the site of our earth-moving work and major restoration implementation last year. So this is a map that was created by Jennifer Kirkland of the valley. So you can see it's divided into an upper zone and a main valley area. So I wanted to point out that our management actions and our restoration practices were influenced by several things, including site conditions that were determined by pre-restoration monitoring, as well as online databases that I'll talk about, as well as access. And so, with this kind of restoration work, we were using heavy machinery for a lot of it, and we couldn't access certain sites. So what you can see here is throughout the whole valley, there's large wood placement and planting of diverse native wetland and riparian species. In this larger Zone 2, Zone 1 area, we use geomorphic grade line for our relative elevation model. So this is to get us to our stage 0 restoration objectives using process-based restoration. So that's where it's graded to 1% grade line, and then the water development develops its own flow pathways across the valley floor. And then in the top and bottom ends of this main valley, Zone 1 and Zone 3, we use beaver dam analogues. These are areas that we were not filling in the channel for various reasons, and so we were using VDAs to shallow up those channels, as well as increase connectivity with our floodplain areas. And then on the far right, near the confluence of Winchester Creek, we use nurse cribs for tidal forested swamp restoration. So this is our tidal area of the project. So here's some examples of data platforms that were used in the planning, and there's a lot that goes into planning, and so this is very short talk to talk about that. But so here's an example of the Digital Coast NOAA data access viewer here on the left, and so some examples of how we used this kind of data was for looking at tidal extent for our tidal forested swamp planning, and then LiDAR for our geomorphic grade line relative elevation models. And then Melissa did a fantastic overview and deep dive into CDMOs, water quality and system-wide monitoring protocols. So we're lucky enough to actually we're one of these sites here in Oregon, and so we have great access to this data from right within the watershed here. So we use this for turbidity data during implementation. So with our permitting, monitoring turbidity and sediment movement throughout the implementation process. We also use weather station data as covariates for analyzing monitoring data. So there's a lot of monitoring that's going into this, and having that water quality and weather information right from our site is fantastic. And there's a lot of different ways that we use this information in our planning as well. So a few examples of resources used in planning. So this lower paper here by Powers et al. Talks about the geomorphic grade line relative elevation model process, and I'll show that in a second. And then beaver restoration guidebooks, restoring tidal swamps. These are fantastic resources for implementing or for planning our restoration projects. And you can see the PNEP logo down there on the tidal forested swamp. That's a great resource. So US Forest Service actually provided the geomorphic grade line analysis for us. And what you can see on this map is elevation targets for each of our locations throughout the valley. And so as we worked with the machines out there that were grading the area, we were monitoring that elevation and making sure that we stuck to those targets, and that gave us our 1% grade line. And so moving on to implementation, as I mentioned, grading the valley and placing large wood for that process-based restoration. Large wood is really important because it intercepts flow and slows flow and changes the dynamics of it, and that deposits sediments within the system rather than flushing through the system, and that helps develop those flow pathways. We relocated 9,897 fish and amphibians throughout the ditched system there prior to filling in those ditches. As I said, we included beaver dam analogues to capture sediments. So we installed some lower BDAs in the system before the earth moving work, with the hopes that we would capture some of those sediments before they moved out into the main Winchester Creek system. And so we use nurse cribs to re-establish tidal forested swamps. So this is a really important habitat type that we've largely lost throughout Oregon and its range. And so this little area of tidal influence here is we're building these cribs to plant the species associated with those, which is primarily Sitka spruce in our area, and then understory species. We're continuing to do invasive plant management to reduce reinvasion in these disturbed systems following restoration. And there's a lot of planting that's going on in our project area. And so we're using this both as an objective to restore those diverse native plant communities, but also working with our tribal partners and our community members to really get people involved in the project, practice co-stewardship, and work towards biocultural restoration. And we are also implementing a traditional garden space under guidance with Confederated Tribes of the Coos-Lew, upland, South Slough Indians. So then once all of this restoration implementation has happened, we're using process-based approach so that water is now across the valley instead of in that incised ditched area, and developing those flow pathways, and some native plants coming back on their own, and some many are planted, as you can see here. So then I just wanted to touch base on effectiveness monitoring. So there's been a lot of data collected prior to restoration. We use a BACI design, before after control impact. So we use a lot of the vegetation data that Melissa mentioned in CDMO. So across the NERS system, we're collecting vegetation data. Jenny Schmidt is overseeing that work. And so that will go into our reference site information that we're comparing to this study. And then Jen Kirkland is drones and maps, as she likes to say. And so we were lucky enough with our funding to incorporate a large amount of monitoring into this project, as well as launching our drone program so that we can have in-house LiDAR and other important information. We are about to make public our monitoring plan, and so stay tuned for that. I just wanted to share this screenshot of the table of contents, because it is really a robust monitoring plan that Jenny Schmidt and Chris Janicek from Oregon State University has really been leading these efforts. And it really is quite impressive, the amount of monitoring that's going on in this watershed and in our reference sites as well. This data will be publicly available. At the moment, we would love, this has been a great session, lots of ideas of how to make this data publicly available, and we'd love any platforms that people have that we could host, they could host this kind of information now or in the future. That'd be excellent. So we are part of the National Australian Research Reserve system, and we do have a restoration monitoring working group that is trying to figure out how to do this for the system. There's going to be a lot of data, so we've got a lot going on here. And then, you know, this project is really made possible by our funders. So the NERS Habitat Protection and Restoration Funds, which were made possible by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And they're the main funders that really is covering a lot of our monitoring work as well as the restoration. So really grateful for that. And then through the Coos Basin Coho Partnership, with the Focused Investment Partnership funding, our Friends of South Slough, and the US Fish and Wildlife Service Coastal Program, and then the Coquille Tribal Community Fund have all contributed to this. And then in addition to funding, just the hard work of many, many people have been really getting dirty and contributing to this project. And that's it from me. I've been trying to list all of the people that have actually had a positive influence on this project and hands-on, and the list is growing rapidly. Thank you.